back today. So nothing to fret. We're going to do a quick introduction to who we are at R3 and talk to you a little bit about Corda and hopefully make a good case for Corda in the developer community. It should be pretty interesting. We'll break the questions somewhere in the middle and we'll try to make sure that we can answer any questions you have, and we'll tell you a little bit about the other services and the opportunities you have to interact with us here and look for the questions and other things like that. After, we're very friendly, so definitely feel free to use it. I want to give it another, contact you. Hopefully that is all right. Let's just wait for people. I know we had a bunch of registrations. This one, so I guess we got to give it some time. So in the meantime, like I said, my name is David. If you're just joining, this is Peter in the chat, Peter Lee. And I do have a quick favor to ask all of you. If we could just run a very quick, loose, informal poll just to see, are you learning for professional reasons about Corda, or are you just learning for fun, for your own personal interest? If you could just drop that in the chat, that'd be great. Are you learning for professional reasons or just for personal? Just type a P or an L based on whichever you're planning on doing. If you're here for professional or for personal reasons. Just learning or for professional. Awesome. And stream health looks good. We're now at about 5:02, so I think I can basically just jump into it. So this is Corda 101. If you're watching this, that's what you've signed up for. Thank you. We appreciate it. The first things first. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the references we have to offer you throughout this. If you have any things that you want to look into a little more, starting with our Slack. You can find us on our public developer Slack, where we talk to Corda developers and blockchain developers from all around the world on slack.corda.net. You can also find our documentation on docs.corda.net. We have a free developer training available to you on training.corda.net. And our GitHub repository, Corda is open source, and you can find that on github.com/Corda. You can email my team at devrel@r3.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Corda Blockchain, at Inside R3 with the hashtags Corda and R3. So, all of that being out of the way, I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the philosophy underpinning Corda and what it is, right? So Corda is a distributed ledger technology. We believe that distributed ledger technology reduces cost and time to market while increasing the speed of business. Hence, our company was founded with this belief in around September of 2014. We held our first roundtable in New York, attended by 8 banks looking to understand blockchain. A little bit of time goes by and we end up with a partnership of 9 banks that design and deliver advanced distributed ledger technologies to global financial markets. A little bit more time goes by and we build a consortium of banks that grows to about 42 members. Another year or so roughly goes by and we create our first general availability release of Corda open source, which is pretty fantastic, and that was a great addition to our architecture working group that we were building with these other institutions to come up with an enterprise grade blockchain architecture that we've been developing over quite a while now. So a little bit more time goes by and we end up at July 2018, where we published Corda Enterprise 3.0, which was our first 100% compatible release with Corda open source, kind of moving towards that open core model that you see with a lot of similar kinds of businesses. And by August of 2018, our ecosystem had grown to about 200 financial institutions, regulators, trade associations, and professional services firms and tech companies. Probably worth mentioning as well that myself and Peter are based out of New York, and we have offices in the UK, in Mumbai, and other parts around the world. You can find our employees in a lot of different places. So wherever you are, you can probably find us. That being said, we now have an ecosystem of about 350 plus companies across industry. We kind of recreated a lot of the existing business networks with banks, single member enterprises, corporates. We have the ability to kind of grow your network now by joining different Corda networks that are out there in order to participate in transactions with some of these entities. We offer some fantastic delivery partners to collaborate with when it comes to taking your actual CorDapps that you build using Corda into production. And of course, we have some integrations and some partnerships we built with all of the big infrastructure providers, such as AWS, Hewlett-Packard, Intel, Microsoft, Azure, Oracle, etc. So if you have questions about some of those specific partnerships and some guides for deployment on some of those cloud providers, you can definitely ask us after, and I can get you some links to those. So where are we going with this? The blockchain 1.0, 2.0 philosophy of looking at decentralized ledger technology, we have found was a little bit lacking. It lacked robust identity features, it certainly lacked speed, it lacked real privacy, and it lacked meaningful integration with other services within the kinds of networks that we were trying to serve, especially in the enterprise. So we ended up developing what we like to call the third generation blockchain, Corda. We like to call it the blockchain for business. It's applicable to all industries. It's the only blockchain built specifically for businesses that offers privacy, scalability, and interoperability from the start and the ground up. It was designed to meet the standards of one of the most complex and highly regulated industries, and it can be applied seamlessly to any other area of commerce that you can imagine. And of course, we have a cross-industry ecosystem like I was talking about earlier. We now have the best opportunity to leverage a large network with blockchain in order to get the most value out of this kind of a platform. We have a thriving network, like I said, of over 300 companies that we work with, embracing this technology to solve real-world problems. And of course, Corda is open source, like I mentioned earlier. So you can go and take a look at our project yourself, improve the code, inspect the code, and make all kinds of recommendations for how you think it should work. And that's another reason you should reach out to us on our Slack. That being said, Corda at its base does offer the features I kind of talked about earlier. We have strong identity, we have performance and scalability, privacy baked in, global interoperability, consensus, and we have an open source network. So, what exactly do I mean when I say Corda? The short answer is that it's a permissioned network that provides peer-to-peer communication on a need-to-know basis, which is a bit of a different paradigm than maybe some of the transaction models you've heard of before, where a single transaction is broadcast to all of the nodes on a network. In this case, we create a private network where different entities can host their own Corda nodes that are responsible for signing off on the transactions they approve of explicitly. And only the transactions I quote unquote need to know about are the ones that I will ever be able to see or observe. So in this model we've got here, we have three different technology providers: the Colorado River Authority, Bayes Transcorp, and Titan Technology Partners. You can see each of them has an address. This is just their public IP address and the port on which their Corda node is taking traffic. Then a public key. And so each of them has their own unique key pairs. And then there is a pool or a single notary running as a separate Corda node that validates these transactions as they happen. So let's say Titan Technology Partners wants to issue a loan, we'll call it, to Colorado River Authority. Titan Technology can do that, create a transaction, creating an IOU, let's call it, to the Colorado River Authority. The Colorado River Authority can then sign off on that transaction, and then it can be sent to a notary to validate. And so a trusted party can run the notary, or you can maintain it yourself, depending on your use case and how you're manipulating your Corda network. You can create notaries that validate the transactions along with the two of you. So in order for a transaction to happen, not only does the notary have to approve of this transaction, and you create all kinds of configurable validation on that, but Titan Technology has to approve it, Colorado River has to approve of it, and then the notary has to approve of it, at which point that transaction becomes secure and immutable. It cannot be edited after the fact unless it is through a new transaction. And it is completely secure, it is unchangeable, backed by cryptography, all of the things you'd normally expect to hear about when you're using a blockchain-based data store. It is very flexible to use Corda for all kinds of use cases, and we see that all the time. So hopefully that gives you at least a basic idea to get ourselves started. I do want to ask if you all have any questions, and so I will check the chat real quick and see if anyone's posted. Oh, sweet. So a lot of people just here to learn. That's great to hear. Deepak, I hope the sound gets a little bit better. Sorry to hear that. Glad to hear other people can hear me, though, and nothing crazy has gone wrong. And professional reasons, that's great to hear, Marius. That's awesome. If anyone has any questions, like I said, feel free to post them. I'll give it another second. I think there might be a maybe 20-second delay between me saying these things and you all hearing them on your own computers. It's actually interesting. We were just talking to a company today that plans on maintaining a separate Corda network entirely for their customers. And so they will be provisioning actually Corda accounts, which will be existing in one single Corda node for each of their customers. The Corda accounts SDK lets you create multiple logical sub-vaults where you can create transactions between the accounts on singular nodes, which can obviously be a huge cost save as you start to run nodes further down the road. So I'm going to jump back into the slides then. If I missed anything, Peter hopefully can catch my back, but, or at least if I miss anything as I'm going, I should say, Peter can hopefully catch my back. So what I want to emphasize here is that the idea is actually that you are not a single Corda node or network by your organization on your own. The real value starts to come in when you actually participate in a network of Corda nodes, right? So in the ideal scenario, there's actually many Corda nodes by other organizations that you can interact with, and notaries mediating those transactions between all of you. I would recommend taking a look at the Corda Network Foundation, for example, to take a look at how that might really relate to this example as an analog. And so you can see that this example we illustrated earlier of our own notary pool with Colorado River, Bays Transcorp, and Titan Technology Partners exists as a subnet within a larger network of Corda nodes between lots of different participating entities across multiple industries. This is where things get really powerful. And of course, we have an identity manager, we like to call it the doorman, and a network map that ensures the discoverability between all of the different nodes on the network and enables consistency as far as identities are concerned. You could almost think of it like a phone book available to every Corda node. So, Corda nodes are nice because they abstract away a lot of the complexity of updating the ledger, and of course even more of the complexity of maintaining a blockchain yourself. So the node abstracts away all of the basic problems you'd run into with messaging, concurrency, storage, disaster recovery, peer discovery, key management, data distribution. These are a lot of the problems you're probably going to run into very quickly if you're trying to maintain a blockchain on your own. So we have this really wonderful set of abstractions called flows, which run on Corda nodes that create ledger updates. Those ledger updates you can also think of as transactions. So I can run a flow on a Corda node, and that flow can identify what kind of transaction that I want to create, and you will code that, you will write the code for that flow. So I can specify the kinds of transactions I want to create, build them in flows using Java or Kotlin, and then run them on specific Corda nodes. So for some examples, right, you can have something called a token issuance flow, a create mortgage flow, a crowdfunding flow, etc. These run on your Corda node, and if the flows are successful, meaning they are validated by both the originating party and the other parties that need to know about it, then if the notary validates that transaction as well, it is considered valid. The transaction is created, broadcast to all the relevant parties and none of the irrelevant parties, and the transaction is signed and considered valid. And that is now the new immutable source of truth for the state of those objects that you were representing. So, CorDapps. We talked a little bit about them within the context of flows. So what are CorDapps, right? The first thing that we want to understand is that a CorDapp is a Corda decentralized application. Maybe that wasn't too surprising, that acronym. So a decentralized application, a computer application that runs on a distributed computing system. It's also sometimes referred to as a smart contract, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So CorDapps are just these simple binary jars that are stored inside of Corda nodes. Each node can carry multiple CorDapps. It is literally a jar file that is copied into a specific folder on the node running Corda. No magic happening there. You can install CorDapps relatively easily on your machines. So you can see here we have some examples: a Hello World CorDapp, a whistleblowing CorDapp, etc. In a real life example, you could have, say, a supply chain app running on your node, and you could have an insurance app running on your node at the same time. They're just jar files, so try to keep that in mind. So here's how blocks are kind of chained up in a CorDapp. Data in general is stored as states in Corda's node database, meaning literally we call any object you could represent digitally on the blockchain a state. So for example, if I were a car dealership, I could have states that represent the cars. And let's say a manufacturer could also have states that represent their manufactured vehicles. And then then I could create certain transactions to sell those cars from the dealership to me, from the manufacturer to me, the dealership. And so what happens is, within the Corda nodes database, a state is created. You can have an originating transaction, and that state exists on my node, let's say. And when a transaction happens, that transaction consumes the previous state or block. And when that previous state or block is consumed through a transaction, you actually can trace back and find the previous transactions and previous states as you go. We call this kind of an unspent transaction output model. These blocks are chained together. Tracing backwards is really easy. And we can create transactions with multiple inputs and multiple outputs. And the data that we are collecting is never actually deleted from the database. Hence, it is immutable. And you always have that ability to trace back. You even have a feature within the notaries to take any given state and trace all the way back to the origin of every single object or state involved, which is quite powerful. Depending on what you are trying to do, that can be a really killer feature for you. And we've had some customers use it. So here, just to kind of bring the point home, here's a simple transaction that takes two inputs, produces two outputs, and then in a future transaction, those two inputs and outputs don't have to be stuck together either, right? Every state can be treated separately, and so transaction 2 can occur with a separate input, called input 2, and an output called output 0, which is from transaction 1. But of course, output 1 from transaction 1 can be used somewhere else. Hopefully that is starting to sink in. I know I'm going a little fast here, so feel free to post questions. So if this is making sense to you, then hopefully I can make the case that when building a D-app, Corda provides very simple abstractions, comprehensive developer tooling, and versatile feature sets. Just as some quick examples worth checking out, I recommend doing a quick Google for the Node Explorer and our Virtual Studio Code extension. And I believe we are also working on improving the tooling we have around IntelliJ as well. So we have a lot that we can offer as far as abstractions are concerned. So we'll take a quick look at a CorDapp just to bring some of this home. Here's a theoretical map of 3 parties and a notary pool that want to deal with the sale of a car, in this case a Camaro. So there's Titan Technology Partners operating out in the US. There's Bayes Transcorp inside of the European region, and Acme International out there with, in their vault, a bunch of currency, right? They have some money. They want to create a transaction between themselves, Acme International and Titan Technology Partners. The transaction is relatively intuitive. They create a transaction transferring the ownership of some money in exchange for a Camaro, right? So on the other side of it, in that vault of both of these consumers, one will contain $500 inside of its vault after this transaction. The other will contain a Camaro after this transaction. The digital representation of such, that is. The nice thing is that once this transaction is approved by both, there is a set of contract rules that are executed when the transaction is happening that actually verifies all kinds of important and relevant details about this transaction. For example, as it is running, you could have contract code that runs to validate all kinds of aspects about the Camaro, such as the license plate. In New Jersey, a license plate has to have 6 digits. So you could say in your contract code, let's make sure the Camaro is in perfect condition. Let's make sure the Camaro has a valid VIN number and make an API call validating the VIN number. Make sure that the license plate of the car is 6 digits, and make sure that the car is in good condition, and even trace back the origins of the car on the blockchain to the original manufacturer to see what has happened with it since. How many times has it changed hands? You could imagine maybe a Carfax type scenario that we're hopefully driving at here. And so when this transaction does happen, if the contract code for the CorDapp on my Corda node validates this transaction, meaning the contract checks are all considered passed, so it is valid, and the same checks on the other party's CorDapp also are successful, they all pass, and the transaction is considered valid, and the notary approves of this transaction. Let's say the notary is interested in validating that this transaction happens in a certain time window, which can become a lot more useful, let's say if you're doing high frequency stock trading, or just doing stock trading in general, and you want to make sure that a particular transaction happens within 24 hours. For example, purchasing an options contract or something like that. Only then, when the notary pool has approved of that transaction that both of the, or I should say all of the parties involved in a transaction are involved in, then it is approved. And so what we give you in Corda is the ability to define the contract code, the objects themselves, and the flows, and how those flows will collect the signatures from the relevant parties, and how those flows will respond when flows are attempted to communicate with their Corda nodes. So you'll end up writing a paradigm of, here is the flow as far as the outgoing communication is going to look from my node, and you can also identify all kinds of code that is triggered as a response to a flow that is running against your Corda node, which can, as you can start to imagine, allow you to adjust to a wide variety of use cases. So if all of this is making sense, then I definitely recommend taking a look at our developer bootcamp. You can find these links. I will post them in the chat as well. I will make sure to get these to you guys. Let me see if I can paste them out. Interesting. The computer does not want to cooperate. All right, I'll post these in the chat in just a second. So we have our next, if you want to go to the next step, you can grab our developer bootcamp, where Peter and I and other members of the DevRel team will walk you through the code involved in building a CorDapp. It's relatively straightforward, you'll be happy to know. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our upcoming CordaCon, where we're going to be talking about all kinds of new features, not just about Corda 4.6, but making announcements for roadmaps in the future and other interesting blockchain use cases we've found with customers. And we have a great speaker lineup, including, I believe, some people on my team as well who will be speaking there. So I highly recommend taking a look at that. It should be a lot of fun. And so with that, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the like button underneath this video. Click the subscribe button for this YouTube channel. And if you want to find out about more videos like this, hit the notification bell. And by all means, reach us on r3.com, corda.net, LinkedIn, Twitter. You can find myself, Peter, Ashutosh, and the rest of the team on slack.corda.net, where we hold regular office hours helping developers with blockchain problems around the world. Every week we run regular office hours. And you can, of course, check out our developer training on trading.corda.net. I promised you some links, so I will post them right in the chat just to make things easier. There we go. So if you're interested in any of those things, highly recommend taking a look at them. Again, thank you for taking a look and interest in Corda. I hope this was valuable for you, and by all means, feel free to reach us any way you choose, and we will be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much. Again, I will be signing off from here, but by all means, please do feel free to keep in touch, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Do Nothing Project for Sunday, October 4th. In our ongoing suite of doing nothings in this absolutely strange era that we're all living in right now. Nice to see you, Andrew and Lily. Thank you for moderating, and good to see all the familiar names coming in. The regular posse. Hey, Sandra, Brooke, Tier, PJ, Sarah, Jeff McPhee, Candace, Fred, and on. You guys able to hear me okay? Not sure if this thing works. Yeah. Good day to friends in Australia. Okay. So if you've never been to the if you've never been to the Do Nothing project before, once a week, the community gets together. We basically do nothing for 40 minutes, which is to say we might meditate, we might not meditate. I think most people meditate. Usually it's me, but Andrew and Lily guide occasionally. And I think now that my schedule's getting more settled, I'll be here. I'll probably be doing it like three weeks a month, and then there'll be on 1 week it'll be a rotation, because we got a good group of other meditation guides, and the idea is basically to just hang out and do something in a very easygoing way. I'm assuming everything works. So tonight I was thinking about what to do, and I was thinking, so it's like thinking about the variation of very little that we're going to do. And I was thinking very much in that theme about one of the experiences that I really like the most of doing meditation retreats, back when I was doing meditation retreats, either sitting them or guiding them, mostly sitting them, back when we were doing them in person. Although now people are doing virtual retreats. Maybe we'll try to do something. I think we're going to do like a half-day one here. We're just trying to get something like that worked out, but then we'll maybe do a longer one in the new year. Anyway, we're trying to figure it out virtually. But anyway, one of the things I really like is there's this thing that happens when you're meditating for a few days, and if people have meditated in this community for that long or done retreats, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it's sort of like you arrive and you're so busy up, your nervous system is just so hectic. And you think you got all these problems, and you do have problems, I guess. But of course, as the mind starts to settle and gets quieter, then there's fewer problems. The things that you thought were so urgent, they're not really so urgent after all. It doesn't say there isn't urgent things going on, but that's the experience in the moment of because the mind is sort of stretched through time. It's thinking about the future and worrying about stuff. It's worrying about the past. It's and you're in this sort of horizontal time. And when you get to the retreat, you're very much in that, and then there's this slowing down. It just parallels what happens in a sit, just in a more dramatic way, where things just start to slow. And I'm always interested in this because it's almost like there comes a point where I feel like I'm barely breathing. It's just the breath is so subtle, and the whole nervous system is so settled, and everything is just moving at this more stately, slower rhythm. And in those places, I'm always wondering, how slow can it go? Can I slow right down to what feels, with my attention, what feels in my experience to be almost like there's no time? So this meditation I would call vertical time, or just vertical, because there's the horizontal time that I talked about, of course, the time we all live in, the time we're inside. But time is relative. Subjectively, it's relative both from an Einstein kind of point of view. It's also relative just subjectively in our internal experience. Sometimes it feels like it's going by fast. Sometimes it feels like it's going by slow. And one of the more interesting things that can happen in practice is a sense in which you kind of start to drop down in this vertical way to the actual moment, and it feels like nothing is happening at all. That it's almost like it's paradoxical, Of course, you're in time in some way, but it feels like you're not in time. And who knows where awareness really is. So that's something to kind of explore, I think, in this meditation, is just explore what it might feel like to get so still and so sort of granular with your attention that everything is beginning to slow down. And a lot of that has to do with the delicacy of how you're paying attention and the intention around it. And then we'll kind of make this transition from almost looking for that to drop down into that kind of more quiet vertical place to sort of being it, to letting it upwell through us, all in the service of giving us a little more peace and quiet in these crazy days. Because that's what I found, is that that space, which is the space we go in a lot here, is very substantive. It's nurturing. It's very healing. It feels like it's like this balm for a nervous system that's so overworked. Of course, we need to be out there, and there's a lot of going on right now, but this is our time to reset. Well, that's the practice. Can't see what's happening there, but I'm going to just guide this practice, hit a bell, and then afterwards check in, see people can leave reports and ask questions or comment, whatever. It's all good. Okay. We're going to do a 25-minute sit, which means we're going to finish at 8:33. Of course, as always, if you got your own technique, your own version of doing nothing, you're welcome to do that and just hang out with us. Okay, so yeah, your own way to start off. Of course, that's cool, but if you want to follow along, I like to start with a few kind of clearing breaths. So we're just kind of like I'm reminding my nervous system that I'm about to meditate, and I'm clearing space a little bit. So breathing in is sort of it's the upward motion, stretching up. And the out breath is that's the slowing breath. So the long, you can extend it a bit. We breathe out, the diaphragm settles and kind of lets go. So there's this little letting go feeling. You can imagine as you're breathing out any tension. You kind of take the opportunity to do a little body scan. Just a sweep, like, okay, I'll just loosen the forehead here. Loosen the eyes and the cheeks. Loosen the shoulders. Not compromising the integrity of the straight spine. I mean, that upwardness is also really important. There's sort of a dignity sitting, facing your life quality, awake to this moment. But the out breath can definitely be where we start to settle. And when you breathe out, really now notice the contact with the ground underneath you, the couch, the cushion, the seat, your feet on the ground. So you really want to arrive. You're not kind of uptight, kind of holding yourself above it. You really want to kind of land. Of course, there's the equanimity muscle here, the all-important equanimity piece, which is partly an attitude of welcoming everything happening in your 360 surround, all the sounds you may like or not like, the body sensations, the thoughts, the feelings. It's like, oh yeah, this is just what's here. So it's realism. You're not going to get in any fights with any of it. And it's not just an attitude. It's begins as an attitude, but it becomes a kind of adjustment we make in our both our body and our mind. For me, it feels sort of like a looseness or smoothness, like letting everything roll through. The opposite is to feel braced or tight or rigid. It's like we're beginning the process here of disappearing into that vertical time. So open, the boundaries start to soften. Things begin to open up. We can begin to notice more subtle details, qualities in our experience. Send our attention in. So you can either just stay here, open, aware, in a more open awareness practice, just being. Or if you want to choose a home base, some anchor, you can get really curious about the sensation of the breath or experience of sound or the sensation of another body part. I'll come back in a bit. Good. So just being patient as things start to slow. Patience is another thing that helps here. And then if we're using a sensation, a sound or part of the breath or some subtle feeling in the body, then the idea is to make the attention really delicate. The more crude or forceful or strenuous our attention, the more it creates kind of feedback in the nervous system. So instead, you do the opposite. You get really still, but not in a tense way. And then you just delicately send your attention into the softest part of some sensation. Maybe you send it into the end of the out-breath, that little pause, or into some drone sound around you, a vent or a heater. And it's like it's moving into the sensation. Parsing through it. Something to play with. And thoughts may still be there. Feelings of busyness, etc. may still be there. That's okay. Even so, you can, in the foreground, make this different commitment with your attention. Choosing to get curious about this question of how slowed down can you get. Letting the breath do what it does. And there's this really kind of nice shift that happens where, it starts out, it's like you think you're kind of noticing something subtle with your experience, and you think it's your attention that's slowing down, or it's something that you're finding, that slowness. And then you realize actually it's something that you are. And it's just about being slow, being so still. And it just sort of upwells through you. And it's really this sort of curiosity that you cultivate about the experience of stillness itself, the subjective experience of being still. What is that? Being absolutely present and aware of that. What is that? Vertical spine, vertical time.